So I was watching some Barbarossaa videos when I came across this statement.
And she's no different than Joe Biden telling men that it's up to them to, stop campus sexual assault. The implication is clear. He's telling men to jump in harm's way for women, and he's telling them that it's their duty and their moral obligation to do so, while this aging, decrepit piece of trash is accompanied everywhere he goes by a small army of Secret Service agents toting some kind of submachine gun everywhere they go. Maybe Joe Biden, maybe you should tell some of the prison guards and wardens who are actually getting paid for the safe, keyword, safe imprisonment and rehabilitation of countless male inmates to put themselves in harm's way to curb the epidemic of male rape in the prison systems, Joe. Maybe you should try that instead of telling unarmed college-age men to jump into dangerous and potentially deadly situations to defend women, while you would never, ever even think of telling women to do the same thing for us. Doesn't earn you any votes, isn't that right, Joe? That's what it boils down to. VAWA Joe Biden, having politically maneuvered himself into access to 24/7 protection from a small army, likes to sit back in his relative position of safety and tell the rest of us to put ourselves in harm's way for women we don't even know. And this is why I so thoroughly and vehemently spit on anybody, anywhere, trying to tell me that I should defend women that I don't know or care about. What I do is I equalize the violence that the Phyllis Schlaflys and the Joe Bidens of the world attempt to exert onto men by refusing to act in defense of any women I don't explicitly want to defend for my own personal reasons. The women in my family, they've made sacrifices for me. Therefore, I defend them if it's necessary. The women I don't know on the street somewhere, you're fucking on your own. Just like I am. And to all you white knights, this is when your lizard brain kicks in. And this is the part where you tell me that, I'm just like the feminist or some bullshit about not staring into the abyss lest you become part of it bullshit. Fuck your catchphrase, you go defend them. You're such a big man, you go do it. That goes to all the white knights listening, and that goes to Joe Biden, and that goes to Phyllis Schlafly, that goes to all of you hypocritical pieces of trash.
I can't believe what I am hearing. Barbar is actually saying if he's seen a woman being harassed on campus, or out on the street, that he would do nothing to intervene. I find this cowardly and disgraceful. While I'm all in favor of fighting feminism, we have to remember that men and women are still different. Men are significantly larger than women. Therefore, if a woman is being sexually assaulted or harassed in any way, you as a man have an obligation to protect her. Furthermore, a real man stands up to danger to do the right thing. It is a man's role to protect women. Any man trying to get out of that responsibility is a coward. Any man who wants to deny nature, and while about nature, to get out of his manly responsibilities, is just as bad as the feminists, a complete gender ideologue, and quite frankly, a coward. Is what I would say if I were a traditionalist white knight mangina motherfucker. Had you guys going, didn't I? There are two reasons I did that little joke. One of them is for the laughs and shock value, but the other is because the words I just got through saying, most likely would be the reaction of any tradcan who happened to come across Barbarossaa's video. And so let's talk about this mentality and how it occurs. But first, I want to clarify that I wholeheartedly support what Barbarossaa was saying in that video. If a woman is being harassed, attacked, raped, or whatever, before you make any decision, I want you to ask yourself, what choice would I make if that were a man instead of a woman? And the reason I say that is because when it comes to helping a stranger change a flat tire, or giving them a ride, or helping them with their homework, or helping to carry their books, or jumping into a fight to save them, some people do these things and others don't. Everyone has their own take on it. Some people will stop and pick up a hitchhiker, others simply will not. And I'm not going to make a judgment and tell you what decision you should be making. That's for you, the individual, to decide. All I suggest is that you don't jump in to save a woman if you wouldn't do that for a man. But let's talk now about the tradcan white knight mentality. Why would the tradcan call Barbar a coward? Granted, jumping in to save a total stranger from a gang assault is a very heroic thing to do. If you are unarmed and not wearing a bulletproof vest, it's also an incredibly stupid thing to do. Hell, even if you have a gun, it's a stupid thing to do. Any of them could have guns. You might pull the trigger in self-defense as one of them comes running at you, but then spend the rest of your life behind bars for killing that person, because our judicial system is just that fucked up. If we're talking about one man grabbing and harassing a woman, the danger to yourself goes down. It goes down, but it's still there. Even if that man is smaller than you don't know how good of a fighter he is, or if he is carrying a weapon, or if he has friends who will help him exact revenge on you, even if he is a runt, and your interjection becomes a physical altercation, and you beat his ass, if you even by pure accident do any real serious harm to this man, you can be facing prison, or a hefty fine, even if he was in the wrong. If you break his face, you may be the one having to pay for his facial reconstruction surgery. You just don't know the outcome. I wouldn't consider walking away from a dangerous situation that never involved you to be an act of cowardice. It's not the same thing as leaving a loved one in harm's way while you drive off, or running out of the house and leaving your kids to fend for themselves against an intruder. Staying out of things that don't concern you isn't cowardice, and what looks like a clear case of a man harassing an innocent woman may very well turn out to be a boyfriend and girlfriend having their monthly dramatic lovers spat that acts as a prelude to really good make-up sex. And if you were to step in there and tell that guy to get his hands off her, or to leave the little lady alone, he could very well initiate hostility in defense against what he sees as some rival male demonstrating his alpha status. You may very well prompt him into a violent altercation that was never going to take place that night, until you tried pushing him around with your authoritarian statement, ordering him as to what he can and cannot do with his own woman, and when that violent altercation happens, she ends up taking his side in the whole thing. Because that pushing, shoving, grabbing, yelling, cussing, threatening, that was going on, that was a monthly thing they did, and believe me, I have seen this situation happen often, and I am not at all being hyperbolic when I say their altercation could be a prelude to make-up sex. I just recently came across a psychology study that showed women who often got into relationships that involved domestic violence, had, disproportionately, a preference for rough, violent sex, which lead the researcher to speculate that these women initiated domestic violence occurrences out of sexual frustration. I recently read this study, and I'll link if I can find it in my browser's history, but it's something I have theorized for a long time now. Anyhow, bottom line, there is nothing cowardly about staying out of other people's business. As for my fictional Tradcan argument about men are bigger than women, well, yes they are. But men are bigger than men, and women are bigger than women. What I mean by that is, even though on average, a woman will be smaller than a man, there are men who are significantly bigger and stronger than other men. You take a look at your average pro wrestler, these men can beat senseless your average adult man with no more effort than he could your average woman, and there are freakishly strong women that really can beat up men. So if anything, the message should be larger people have an obligation to save smaller people. There would be no need to gender it. So if you see some small runt getting picked on by a couple of bigger guys, it's your job to play hero and do something about it. What? You're not buying it, neither am I. Now I know I am pulling a fictional argument, but these arguments have been made by the white knights. I was just putting out a compilation of things I've heard people say, and these are for the most part traditionalist attitudes. The next part being that it is your job as a man to protect women. Here's a Joe Biden quote: "If a man raised his hand to a woman, you had the job to kick the living crap out of him." I realize that's not very presidential or vice presidential, but it's something every man should begin to understand. If men and women are equal, why are men expected to save women? Why shouldn't women be expected to save men? If we're going to stick with because women are weaker they must be protected, then I insist the rule ought to be big people have a responsibility to protect smaller people. Gender need not play into it. It comes back to the traditionalist notion that men are protectors and providers, or at least in this case, protectors. And I have a question for the feminists. Why don't you object to this man? This man, Joe Biden, champion of war, is cherished by women, Democrats, and feminists, yet he holds men to the old traditionalist patriarchal role of protector. If feminism is about fighting traditional gender roles, if it is about fighting patriarchy, if it is about equality of the sexes, then why do I hear no peep from the feminists about his insistence that a man's role is to be an old-fashioned traditional patriarchal protector of women? How come you are not objecting to this? And all self-proclaimed gender egalitarians who want to think yourself above the MRM and feminism aspect of gender politics, let me ask you this: why should the people born with a penis risk their own life and well-being specifically to come rushing to the aid of the people who were born with a vagina? How is it equal to say that one group of people must place the well-being of another group of people ahead of themselves? What if Joe Biden had insisted that it is every Negro's job to come running to the aid of every Asian person, thereby putting Asian interest ahead of black interest? We wouldn't tolerate that type of bigotry when it comes to race. We, in this day and age, would never dream of promoting the rights and well-being of one race above another. But interestingly, we all seem to be silent on men placing the safety and value of women above men. We all seem to agree on that: feminists, traditionalists, men, women, cultural Marxists, egalitarians, and many who call themselves MRAs. It seems to be our cultural consensus. place the value and well-being of women above men, and the testament of a man is his willingness to sacrifice himself for women, and all of us will use shaming language and emotional appeals, telling any man that doesn't want to comply that he isn't manly, he's a coward, he's selfish, etc. And I know there are tons of women and feminists alike, who cherish Joe Biden, and back his statement, back the sentiment, that men are to place themselves in harm's way to protect women. But here is why: if you are a woman, especially a feminist, you ought to be rejecting this. Not only would it be you making good on your claims about fighting patriarchy, but the establishment of men as protectors, the act of locking men into a gender role, by default locks women into theirs. If a man is to be the hero, be the brave, the self-sacrificing, the active, who takes charge of the situation, and women are to do nothing to save a man or a woman from sexual harassment and assault, and all of the onus of responsibility falls on the shoulders of the male sex, then you by default are saying that women are weak, women are cowards, women are passive, and this is their role. Again, if you're not getting it, let me put it to you this way: if men are to take charge of the situation and play hero, because it is the male role, then what is the female role? To be the victim, to be the passive passerby? It would seem so. And imagine how this plays out in other situations. Young males are raised from day one to be heroes, to be brave, to be self-sacrificing, to take charge. They grow up watching this on TV, reading it in their comics, playing this fantasy out in video games, acting it out in day-to-day life until it becomes a part of his character that he applies to everything in life. He is always to be strong, to be the initiator, the brave. Perhaps this plays out in the workplace. I hear feminists bitching that men are seen as natural leaders, and this makes it hard for women to climb the ladder. Well, why are men seen as leaders? Could it be the fact that you push them into a role of playing hero to save innocent weak females? What I am saying, my dear feminists, is you are taking part in perpetuating the very problem you gripe about. You want more strong, tough, manly, take charge, female role models on TV, yet in the real world you continue to demand men play the role of strong tough hero, defender of weak helpless women. Don't you get it? By locking men into that role, you have by default locked women into their role, and feminists don't just do this with Joe Biden, the great VAWA champion. They also do it when shaming MRAs and MGTOW. How many times have we all heard the statement from them that MRAs and MGTOW are just losers who can't get laid, live with their mother, playing video games? We've all heard this 100 times, but look at how this backfires, dear feminists. By shaming us with "you can't get laid," you are reaffirming the notion that a man isn't a real man unless he can score sex. This feeds into the double standard you bellyache about. The double standard that when women have many sex partners they are sluts, but when men have many sex partners they are studs. You bitch about it, then reaffirm it. You've heard the explanation before. A lock that can be opened by many keys is a poor lock, but a key that can open many locks is a master key. This is the crux of the double standard you bitch about. And here you are reaffirming it every time you lash out at MRAs and MGTOW in some juvenile attempt to hurt our feelings with gendered shaming language. You reaffirm the very double standard that real men get lots of sex. And when you shame us with living in your mom's basement, you are reaffirming that a man's job is to be financially successful. But you do not apply this same expectation to your fellow woman, the unemployed female living with her parents, the unemployed housewife living off of her husband's income, like the freeloading male living off of his parents. You are silent about this. But when you want to shame males you go right to the gendered shaming language of insisting it is a man's job to make money. You create your own problems. Let's go over the list again, shall we? You claim men are to be the strong brave heroes who actively save weak helpless submissive passive females. You claim men are to go out and get lots of sex to be a real man. You claim men are to do whatever it takes to be financially successful. Did you ever stop to think these things could account for most of the pay discrepancy you bellyache about? Society sees men as leaders, because you women hoist that burden onto men. Men feel a compulsive need to get laid to prove themselves a real man, to earn respect. Therefore he is highly motivated to make money to attract women with his provider status. Again, you women are the ones locking men into these roles, not patriarchy. You place enormous pressure on males to succeed, and then you bitch about these highly success-driven womanizing males taking charge and taking risks and climbing the corporate ladder while women stay put, content, passive, waiting to be rescued, and keeping their legs closed so as to not be conquered by a master key, knowing the more money she makes, the harder it will be for her to reach up and find a man who makes more money than her, and she needs a man to make more money than her so she can live out that dependent role, relying on a strong wealthy alpha provider male. Again, you feminists bitch about gender roles, and then take part in reaffirming them. But rather than realizing this and fessing up to it, you bitch about Mario Brothers rescuing a damsel in distress in video games and lack of strong female characters on TV, instead of telling women to run to the rescue of man, and take charge of the situation like a hero. You tell them to stand around being passive while the men take charge for them. But you think insisting there be more strong female make-believe characters on TV to act as make-believe role models is going to act as a counterbalance to the real-world role you carve for them by virtue of locking men into their role? It ain't video games, it ain't patriarchy, it isn't the Republican Party, it isn't the media, it's you. It is feminists and your fellow woman that is obligating men to make as much money as possible in order to avoid your shaming language, and to get laid. It is you women that choose wealthy males, therefore obligating men to go above and beyond to be financially successful. It is you women that judge a man's manliness by how many women he's fucked. Dear feminists, women in general, and traditionalists, you create all the problems for yourself that you bitch about. All three of you create the problems men have to deal with. You are the cause of your own problems, and ours. Women, you give sex as a reward for the same behavior you bitch about. You insist men be strong, active, wealthy, dominant, take charge, and then wonder why men are always in constant violent competition with one another, causing so much crime. Traditionalists, you lock men into the role of provider, and insist women stay at home as dependents, and you insist that men get married, but then you bitch when men get married and the one with the provider role has to pay for the dependent and her offspring in the divorce. Since you're also quick to insist women are biologically more nurturing, thus biologically more fit to be parents, you create the divorce problem you cry about. Feminists, you bitch about double standard after double standard, all the while reinforcing these double standards. But to get back to the point of this, I completely endorse Barbar's statement. I will not sacrifice myself for some woman, a complete stranger. I will not assume her value is greater than my own. I wholeheartedly and emphatically reject the provider and protector role, and refuse to have my reproductive organs dictate what choices I make in life. I am not a disposable breadwinner for women. I am not cannon fodder for women. I will neither exact or absorb violence on behalf of women. I am not a self-sacrificing hero for women. There are two videos I will link to. One of them is a half-hour Joe Biden speech with him pushing for the reinstatement of VOA. I think it will make you thoroughly nauseous to hear go on and on about protecting women. The emotionally driven language, the references to these are your mothers, your sisters, your daughters, just like a feminist. He lives in a world where victimhood and compassion is all about the mother, the wife, the sister, the daughter, but neither him or anyone gives a shit about the husbands, the fathers, brothers, and sons. The only time the feminist mentions husbands, fathers, brothers and sons is when they are pointing their finger at someone to blame for all of the world's problems. In Joe Biden's mind, only a woman can be a victim, and every man is a disposable utility to protect them. You should really watch that nauseating speech, and notice that he uses the word entitled extra loud and with emphasis. He talks about women being entitled to safety, entitled to justice, entitled to proper response, and so on. He exaggerates the word entitled because, being the psychopath that he is, he knows this is a mentally triggering word in the female psyche, just like the TV commercials that mention how empowering this vacuum cleaner is. And if you watch that video, I want you to realize this: he does not believe in the shit he is saying. He is ass-kissing the female demographic, and when the MRM grows big enough to actually be considered a special interest group, a voting demographic, these slimy little politicians will be kissing our ass and using our key phrases, and our arguments, to appeal to us. The squeakiest wheel gets the most grease, so be sure to squeak loudly. The second link I want to add in the description is a social experiment where a man and woman, both actors, act out a marital fight in public, first with the man as aggressor, and the second with the woman as aggressor. As I am sure many of you can guess, when the man is yelling, cussing, name-calling, and grabs at her arm, people are standing there shocked, and people approach the couple, some threaten to call the cops, and they tell the woman she doesn't have to take this. But when the woman is the aggressor, even striking and shoving the man, in far greater excess than he did to her the first time, the crowd just stands there pointing and laughing at the humiliation of this man getting shoved, and yelled at. Joe Biden, why do we need VOA? Society is already hell-bent on sticking up for women. Cops, neighbors, strangers, family, the courts, everyone, already takes up for women, but it's men who can be beaten and abused in every way, that all of society turns their back on and pretends not to notice. And this video proves it, proves what we already know, what we have seen from others and experienced firsthand. There are people who are worried about how the men's rights movement should be, and look, to the average Joe, they are weary that the movement may come off as crazy and uncouth as the feminist movement. But here's the thing, the average Joe will not be on our side, and will not sympathize with us any more than the average Joe in that video sympathized with the man getting abused. In fact, I can guarantee you, had the male, after being pushed and shoved and yelled at long enough, hit the woman in retaliation for the physical abuse, men and women both would have jumped on the guy. When feminists trash the male sex, it's fine, no one cares. You let an MRA stand up against her bullshit, and he's the bad guy. When you watch that video of the couple's public fight, I want you to take in the knowledge of the situation, that when you are a woman, society cares, society will protect you. But when you are a man, no one cares about you, and your misery and humiliation, especially if at the hands of a woman, is downright hilarious and amusing. And I need you to understand, it's deeper than that. The video is a metaphor for all of the sexes, not just public marital spats, but every aspect of male and female life. Female suffering is a tragedy, male suffering is a joke, and when society at large sees a battle between MRAs and feminists, it's the same way. No matter how in the right the MRA is, he's always a sexist pig to be laughed at. This is why I don't give a rat's ass about appealing to the average Joe. Our appeal must be to a special type of person, the sort of person who is capable of looking beyond the norm and having the normal approved of reaction. He or she must be capable of standing against the norm and declaring that something within their own personal moral compass isn't right, in the way it took a special kind of white person to see people with their Negro slaves, and say, call me crazy, because I know how normal and everyday it is. But do you ever get the feeling maybe we weren't meant to keep people as pets? It takes that very same type of special person to see the gender situation and say, call me crazy, because I know how normal and everyday it is. But do you ever get the feeling that men aren't meant to be punching bags? It's that rare individual in which we must appeal to, not the average Joe. And while I wish we had one large organization which did put on a clean-shaven, soft-spoken attitude and appearance, while the more extreme individuals such as myself delivered a hard-hitting philosophy that the mainstream isn't ready to understand, I come off as very hostile and very sexist. I don't care, it's irrelevant, but it is a shame we don't have one large organization to act as the movement's PR. But nonetheless, it's not that big of a deal, because we're not ready for mainstream acceptance yet. But as time goes on, and our ranks slowly grow bigger, our cultural mood will change, and in time, that which we are, will become mainstream, and then there will be room for moderates and looking good. But for right now, look at that video of how a man being abused is a thing to be laughed at. Maybe the Joe Bidens of the world should be telling women to stop sucking their thumbs and playing the role of a victim, and start interjecting on behalf of men. Ladies, when you see a self-centered entitled bitch yelling at a man, slapping him, pushing him around, in public, don't just stand there, interject yourself. Step up to that woman and tell her she ought to be ashamed of herself for taking advantage of that man's gentle behavior, knowing he isn't going to hit back. Tell her she ought not be taking advantage of that and hitting him. Because it's the truth. These women who hit men in public, they do it because they know he isn't hitting back. He's not hitting back because he knows he is stronger and is more capable of actually doing serious harm. He isn't afraid of her. He is just being a gentle creature and not abusing his strength advantage. That woman on the other hand is abusing her weakness, taking advantage of the man's generosity. These exploitive abusive women push men into eventually snapping and hitting them. These bad women train men to get abusive. I've seen this, and we've all seen this. A gentleman gets into a relationship with a woman that has a habit of getting drunk and angry and start a physical fight. The man acting like a gentleman each time, taking the abuse and walking away, even leaving his own house to get away from her. And he lives in this abusive situation until one day he hits back. And then the floodgate opens, Pandora's box is open. He suddenly hits back more and more until eventually he's trained real good that when she starts her shit, it's time to give her a rap in the mouth to settle her down, and he is transformed into the monster that she eventually wanted him to become. Misogynists don't just exist, they are made by women. So ladies, if any gender needs to be interjecting themselves in a domestic incident, it's women that need to be standing up on behalf of these gentlemen who in public are being physically bullied, and doing nothing to defend themselves.